In this section, as the title indicates, we're going to be talking about license exceptions. Busy slide here, lots of material. Let's buckle down. So what is a license exception? It's an authorization found in parts 740.1 to 740.21 of the EAR that allows for the export or re-export of items under specific conditions that would otherwise require a license under general prohibitions 1, 2, 3, and 8. So right away, we see a tie-in between the general prohibitions and license exceptions. We can't have one without the other. We can't use a license exception, as we've clearly demonstrated, without understanding the general prohibitions. Second bullet point, general prohibitions 4, 7, 9, and 10 don't even allow for any license exceptions. So it's out of the question if our particular transaction is in violation of prohibitions 4, 7, 9, and 10. No license exception allowed under those conditions. Second to the last bullet point, license exceptions under General Prohibition 5, which we talked quite a bit about, require consultation with Part 744 of the EAR. And then General Prohibition 6, last bullet point, has special conditions for shipments to embargoed countries. So throughout our 4 bullet points in this opening slide, lots of tie-ins between the use of license exceptions and the general prohibitions. In order to take advantage of license exceptions, you really have to understand the general prohibitions as they relate specifically to your transaction at hand. Something we haven't talked about much at all is license exceptions and country groups. As you'll see in our first bullet point, for export control purposes related to the country of destination, where we're shipping to, foreign countries are separated into country groups. So yes, we have the country chart, but we also have country groups based on different levels of concern, in essence. We'll talk more about that in just one second. But the country groups, as we'll see in a moment, are found in supplement number 1 to part 740 of the EAR. So in order to properly use license exceptions, it's critical to understand the how and why of country groups. Why is that? Sub-bullet point here. License exception allowances and restrictions can be based on a specific country group. That is why. So all of these factors coming together. What are we shipping? Where are we shipping to? Who's the end user? It's all coming, all the pieces of the puzzle are coming together. License exceptions are a big part of that puzzle. So let's talk about the country groups specifically. They're organized by the letters A through E. Country group A are regime members. Hopefully you remember that term. We're going to refresh your memory in just one second. Country group B, less restricted countries. And although not emphasized in our previous examples, some of the license exceptions that we pointed out briefly in the ECCNs we've looked at had country group B references. We'll see that again with a lot more emphasis in just a couple of slides. Country group C is reserved. There is no country group C right now. Country group D, countries of concern. As the name would indicate, these are countries that we're a lot more worried about in terms of they're getting their hands on controlled items. And then country group E, embargoed and or terrorist supporting countries. We're going to look at each country group right now. So country group A, and this is a memory refresher here, MECR members. This takes us back to ITAR. Hopefully you remember what that acronym stands for. I'll give you a second to think about it. Well, hopefully you recall that MECR stands for Multilateral Export Control Regimes. These are agreements that we've entered into with other countries that we respect and support each other from an export control perspective. So let's look a little deeper. From below country group A, A1 is the Wassenaar participating states, A2, Missile Technology Control Regime, A3, the Australia Group, and A4, Nuclear Suppliers Group. So something that started way back in our conversation on ITAR and export controls in general, here they are again. Now, you'll see a bunch of X's in the box here. This is a different reason for an X in the box. X in the box on the country chart, not a very good thing because it implies the need for an export license or an export exception. The X in the box here means that the country in question participates in these particular agreements. So pick one from right at the very top, Argentina. X in the box, that means they're a part of the Wassenaar Agreement, also a part of Missile Technology, Australia Group, Nuclear Suppliers Group. Look down a little further. Belarus, well, they're not too involved at all. They're in part of the nuclear suppliers group. So an X in the box means that that country participates in that particular regime. That's what country group A tells us. Multilateral export control regime members, basically. So here, an X in the box could be interpreted as a good thing. Country group B, less restricted countries. As the name would indicate, countries that we're less concerned about in terms of our export controls. Doesn't mean we're not concerned at all. Lots of the countries on this list, depending on the ECCN, will have a license requirement associated with it for specific reasons for control. But these are less restricted countries. You'll see country group B, as we mentioned previously, come up quite frequently when we're looking at license exceptions. But it's a big list, and we won't go through each one of them, obviously, but anything from Angola to Bolivia to Hong Kong to Panama to Turkey to Zimbabwe. Country group B, less restricted countries, but certainly not an open invitation to export anything you want to these countries. The process is still in place. There is a license exception specific to country group B. Country group D, countries of concern. Now the X in the box is back to being something that is less than favorable for the particular country in question. So on the left-hand side, country group D, there are reasons why they are countries of concern. D1, national security. D2, nuclear. D3, chemical and biological. D4, missile technology. D5, U.S. arms embargoed countries. So if a country appears on this list and there's an X in the box, that's the reason why we're concerned about this particular country. Let's pick Cuba, a country of particular interest given current events. Well, if you go across, they're showing to have concerns around nuclear, D3, chemical and biological, and D5, of course, there's a U.S. arms embargo in place with Cuba, at least at the time of this recording. Let's look at a couple of other examples. North Korea, rather extreme example, a real country of concern. They have an X in every box. We're worried about them for national security. We're concerned about them for nuclear proliferation, chemical and biological, missile technology, and definitely an arms embargo in place there. So you can see. And the point is this, whether we're talking about country group A, certainly country group B, country group D, when we're looking at a specific ECCN and we're looking for license exceptions, it's going to say country group B, yes, under certain conditions. Country group D, no, for this particular concern. So that, again, there's a tie-in with the reasons for control and potential license exceptions. The final group we're going to look at is Group E, embargoed countries, a short and not very distinguished list. Now you'll notice that country Group E is broken down by E1 and E2. As terrorist supporting countries under E1 and under E2, a unilateral embargo, meaning that the U.S. by itself has an embargo in place. So for Cuba, that's definitely a unilateral embargo. We've been going it alone on the Cuba embargo since the early 1960s. On the other hand, for reasons of terrorist supporting countries, the U.S. is part of embargoes. Iran, North Korea, Sudan, Syria. So country group E, you can tell by reading, we're not here to disparage any country, but not favorable in terms of doing business with the United States. Not favorable at all. So just to summarize, the country groups are very closely tied to the use of license exceptions. As we noted, depending on the ECCN, the citation for the ECCN, there will be possible license exceptions that can be used that will likely make specific reference to a country group. Again, country group B being the most common example of that. Let's move on. So here are the many license exceptions that are out there. And you'll note that each one is portrayed as an uppercase acronym. Let's start with LVS, shipments of limited value. GBS, here it is right away, shipments to country group B countries. CIV, civilian or civil end users. TSR, technology and software under restriction. APP, computers. TMP, temporary imports, exports, re-exports, and transfers in country. Moving on, the license exception RPL stands for servicing and replacement of parts and equipment. GOV, is government, international organizations, international inspections under the Chemical Weapons Convention and the International Space Station. GFT, gift parcels and humanitarian donations. TSU, technology and software unrestricted, and BAG, baggage. Couple more. As we said, it's a long list. AVS is a license exception for aircraft, vessels, and spacecraft. APR, additional permissive re-exports. ENC, encryption, commodities, software, and technology. AGR, agricultural commodities. CCD, consumer communication devices. STA, strategic trade authorization. And SCP, support for the Cuban people. So as one can see, there are lots and lots of possible exceptions. It just depends on the ECCN and the reasons for control. We've seen that already. We'll see it again as we flush out our example. Right now, we're going to stop in this section because in the next section, we're going to go through each one in detail. I hope you didn't think we were just going to list the license exceptions and not talk about them. We're going to go through each one in excruciating detail. So we'll stop here and come back in just a little bit.